What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with another reaction, and we are back with Ancient India Ruled the World. This conversation was just getting good on part one, but I had to stop it due to time purposes, and now here we are back with part two. I'm excited to find out more about Ancient India. Before we do, if you guys happen to enjoy, please don't forget to subscribe, give a video a thumbs up. Also, if you guys would like to support the channel by becoming a member, smash that join button. Get your exclusive benefits, and let's dive in.
Empire, because it sort of seems to me there's something, similar, which is this starts out as sort of a rejection of the contemporary power structure and hierarchy, and then suddenly it becomes a religion of the court. Like how?
So, very interesting question, and one that we can't yet answer, but I'm sure you're actually onto something there. You get Buddhist monasticism from about 150 BC, and there are surviving monasteries, Bhaja outside Pune, Karla, which are excavations into the rock of these enormous halls from this very, very early period. And that spreads up to what's now Pakistan, Afghanistan, into Central Asia. It spreads to the edge of Persia. Now, if, as we now know, you've got large numbers of Indians turning up on the Red Sea ports as sailors, as shippers, as warriors coming for a trip, coming to see another world. Yeah. We got a huge amount of material in the excavations that have turned up from these Red Sea ports. Then, is it a coincidence that Christian monasticism begins where? On the shores of the Red Sea. St. Anthony of Egypt lived on the Red Sea, as did St. Paul the Hermit, the first two Christian monks.
Okay, now we're getting close to Christianity, Indian.
Sanjay Bhaskar was right all along.
So, I mean, that's an interesting thought. Which is
one reviewer ticked me off actually for saying that I make the joke of Sanjay Bhaskar at the Indian, saying Leonardo da Vinci Indian, and then by the end, more or less saying universities Indian, and everything else.
I mean, like at that time, did Indian rulers consider the spread of Buddhism to be something akin to the spread of soft power? Did they go, this is actually in our interests?
So, did Indians start Christianity? No, right? No. Is that what they're saying, or did I hear it wrong? Is that... Now y'all got me thinking about something. Okay, we gonna continue. Y'all drop in the comment section. Did I hear it wrong, or is that what they just said?
That so many people are converting in far-flung corners of our world, in Southeast Asia, China, Japan.
We don't have anything like that, and I don't think that's how it worked. What we have is people doing well for themselves by traveling. So if you're a merchant, the first thing you do is trade with Rome. That goes high. Sometime in the 5th century, Rome goes down. What does Attila the Hun demand, incidentally, as ransom from Rome? £10,000 of Indian pepper. He doesn't ask for Chinese silk. He asks for £10,000 as the most valuable sort of thing he can ask from the city.
£10,000
so after
Indian
Rome
pepper
goes down, almost the last Indian product to make it to Northern Europe is some of the red garnet jewellery in the Sutton Hoo treasure found in 5th century East Anglia. And those contain red garnets from Rajasthan.
Oh, wow.
And that's kind of the last shipment to reach our shores for 1,000 years. There's little bits may make it eventually via Baghdad or other Vikings or something, but the regular export of, for example, Indian pepper, which reaches Hadrian's Wall on a regular basis, that ends by the 5th century. So there's an economic crisis in India because they're not getting the gold that they used to get. So they have the Tamil merchant guilds who are getting their act together by this stage and have their own military. They even have their own assassins to track down anyone that kills their members. It's a great, rather sinister idea, like Game of Thrones.
Netflix commissioned that. I want to see the Tamil assassins.
The Tamil assassins, can you imagine them? There is a bonkers film where Aishwarya Rai turns up teaching martial arts on Hadrian's Wall at this period, incidentally, but well worth looking up. But anyway, back to
So do
the
they
real
turn
world.
southeast?
They turn east. Exactly. And so you begin to get in Indian texts like the Ramayana, in their final form, and the Mahabharata, references to Savarna Bhumi. Savarna Bhumi is Southeast Asia. That whole landmass is Savarna Bhumi, the lands of gold. And particularly, you have a reference in the Ramayana where Sugriva, the Monkey King, says to Hanuman, you must go to Savarna Dvipa, the island of gold, which is probably Sarawak, which had gold mines. And so you start finding little Tamil gold workers' tools with Tamil inscriptions from about the 5th and 6th century. Just as Rome has gone down, these guys now have to work a bit harder to get their gold, and they have to go down to Southeast Asia. So from the 5th century, you get, first of all, a few inscriptions, then you start getting wooden Buddhas, then finally you get little tiny handheld images of Vishnu. By the 6th century, you've got large images of Vishnu, incidentally with a Khmer physiognomy. They're not looking Indian. These guys are looking much more like Southeast Asians.
Yeah.
And finally, you get temples. Initially, very clearly in the Pallava style from southern India, but later going off on their own trajectories. And then you get something even weirder. You mentioned how fractured India was. India remains fractured for much of this period, meaning that you can raise some big temples, particularly if you're a Pallava or a Chola. But in Southeast Asia, you've got the Sri Vijaya Confederacy, which is this sort of sea lords, again, rather Game of Thrones, these sort of merchant lords who run Java and Sumatra. And tax shipping.
That's crazy. It would be really cool to kind of hear all these things that they're talking about, like, be turned into a show. That would be really fascinating, like they did with Game of Thrones. But you got to see the Tamil assassins. You got to see the fall of. I'm sure they actually have a movie or something about that, like the fall of Rome. Y'all correct me if I'm mistaken. I'm sure there's like something out there. But like if you got to see all this, like it'd just be like very interesting, very fascinating. It's just a cool way to learn history in a way. And then you got to kind of see, you will get to kind of see like the spread of Buddhism, how it spread so far and reached so many people through like travel and trade, and how literally valuable black pepper was, because now we think of black pepper as just, we take it for granted basically because there's so much of it. Like you go to the store and there's aisles and aisles of black pepper, and you really don't, and it's not expensive, so you really don't see the value. But back then, like literally one of the most valuable things on earth, it seemed like, was black pepper. And so it's crazy, like there was a time when that was one of the most valuable thing, when today it's just it's black pepper. Like it's in every household, but it's not expensive at all, very cheap. So it just, taking a trip down history, taking a trip back in time is just extremely fascinating. Like this is really cool.
Thrones, these sort of merchant lords who run Java and Sumatra, and tax shipping going to China through the Malacca Straits. And these guys are super rich and can afford to build the same sort of thing, but on a bigger scale. So first you get Borobudur, which is the largest Buddhist monument in the world, and the most sophisticated Buddhist monument in the world, built in the 9th century. Then finally, and most famously, you get Angkor Wat in the 12th century, which is about 10 times the size of any of the Chola temples. It's 4 times the size even of the Vatican City. And that's just the area within the moat.
So you said that there was a prevailing theory that Indian expansion, or the expansion of its sphere of influence into Southeast Asia, that initially everyone thought it was military and it was violent. And then what you're arguing is that, well, actually it wasn't. Of course, then you've got the Chola invasions in the 11th century, I think. So what happens?
So that, just to qualify that. So what you're getting is armed trade.
Okay.
So you've got the merchant guilds who clearly got their own warriors travelling with them, because if you're travelling with gold and gemstones, of course you're going to get pirates.
You want a guy with a big sword.
So
Exactly.
and there is some
Makes
evidence
sense.
that you even get a bit like early East India Company forts on the coast of Chennai or Madras or Bengal, Calcutta. That you're getting the merchant guilds running their own little fortification as well as having their own thing. But then it's not a conquest. They are the guests of these merchant kings in Southeast Asia. And in due course, you get the Cholas. historians are divided on this, and there are nationalist Indian historians who would call it what you just called it, an invasion. Most historians opt for the slightly more neutral raids.
Okay,
So,
right.
so the Cholas, who are these extraordinary, very brilliant rulers of Tamil Nadu, conquer Sri Lanka, burning, incidentally, a lot of the Buddhist monuments there, such as Anuradhapura, seizing their jewels. And we have this in the Sri Lankan chronicles, bewail this looting. And then there's one inscription on the big temple in Tanjore, which says that the great king Rajendra Chola sent a war fleet out to Suvarnabhumi and attacked this place, that place, and there's a list of about 15 ports that he's meant to have attacked, and brought back loot. There's one or two references to a viceroy, but the general scholarly opinion, because these guys are still sending ambassadors out to China only 2 or 3 years later, which is implying that it's not over. They may have lost, may have had their city looted or something, but certainly it sounds more like a raid than a conquest.
Okay.
So, with that one exception, where you've definitely got a military expedition, people putting horses into boats and jumping off a boat with their swords waving and spears flying, and archers and all the rest of it. With that one exception of the Cholas for 1016, 1025. Almost all Indian contact with Southeast Asia is peaceful. And you get the first merchants, and then, very important, you get the Brahmins. Why do the kings of Southeast Asia want Brahmins? Because they offer not only a link with the gods, you're not just the local strongman, you're Mahendra Varma, so you are protected by Mahendra, or Surya Varma, protected by the sun god Surya. You're also, these guys are literate, so they bring the Pallava script, they do administration. Why do the Brahmins come? Because they get paid, given estates, and given princesses, which is a pretty good package as far as the Brahmins are concerned.
Yeah. If I'm a Brahmin, it sounds good to me. If I'm a Brahmin, it sounds good to me. So a lot of the contact between India and Southeast Asia, I guess at the time was peaceful until the rulers of Tamil started doing these raids and conquering, destroying a lot of these Buddhist temples, taking treasure, doing that of such. As history sees, many raids and many conquests and many people looting other people. So definitely seeing all that throughout history. But there was something else he was talking about when the merchant. So that's kind of like you saw, like I feel like in Game of Thrones, or you see in like anime, there's like maybe like placed in the, I'm a big anime fan, placed in a different time period, like these merchants, carrying the gold and then the treasure and everything. They have like armed guards around them, traveling with them to make sure everything is protected, like he said, because of pirates, because of thieves, because people will try to steal this from you. So you get your armed guards, and you pay for security, and there they are with you. So back then you had armed guilds, is what he called them. Armed guilds.
So you get something for everyone. The merchants get their trade, the Brahmins get jobs and wives, the Southeast Asian rulers get administration by experts.
So why wasn't it more military? Was it just that there was an easier and more mutually beneficial deal available? Or was it that it would have been actually quite difficult to preserve your lines of supply and stuff when you've got a sea invasion?
Well, it's not, as sometimes Indian nationalists like to imagine, because Indian religion is terribly peaceful, because unlike, again, the imagined ancient India of peace and prosperity, there's extreme violence in Indian history. If you read the battles of the Pallavas and the Chalukyas, they're constantly wasting each other's cities and raping each other's women and destroying holy temples. And this is going on very energetically. And there are many inscriptions. And that's this. And equally, both the Pallavas and the Cholas conquer Sri Lanka very violently and take the goodies from there. I suppose it's not an easy thing to do a military expedition to Southeast Asia. And
really hard to invade islands.
Yeah, it's quite hard. But also, if you're making lots of money by trading with them, and they've got gold that you can buy very easily, and the merchant guilds are very successfully channeling that back home, you don't really need to.
If it ain't
go
broke,
to all
don't
the
fix
effort.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What stops the expansion of the Indosphere, as you call it? Why does it stop?
So there's one other major thing before we do the decline, which is numbers.
Oh, yeah, numbers.
Very important. And again, so every Indian uncle knows this, but the numbers that we call Arabic numbers in the West are Indian numbers, and the Arabs get them from the Indians. We get them from the Arabs, which is why we call them Arabic numbers, but their place of origin is India. And at a time when in Europe you're still getting long multiplication with MCVVXV1 times MCVVV1.
Does my head in just thinking about it.
The Indians
Yeah.
have got 10 symbols, one of which is 0, which makes it all much easier. And they've got decimal place value and tens, 100,000, tens of thousands, and all
That
this
does
sort of
make
stuff.
life a lot
and
easier.
those ideas spread
Can I give
first.
a big shout out to India because thank you for coming up with the numbers because when he talking about the MCVB, I think math would have been more of a struggle for me had it been in that form. So very thankful. So she brings up the point like, why is there not like a lot of like military conquest or anything during that time? Why? And he said, don't get it wrong, like ancient India wasn't as peaceful as a lot of people try to portray it to be. There was plenty of looting, there was raping, there was a lot of violence, there was wasting men, there was violence going on. You feel me? So it wasn't it's a peaceful religion. So he said, nah, it was violence. Which I mean happened, like I said, everywhere else in the world this stuff happened, so it doesn't shock me. But then they didn't need military conquest. It wasn't necessary because I mean they could easily get to go like through trading and everything, and through this system everybody was happy. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then military conquest to conquer islands, gets more complicated when having to do that. So, and when you can get your hands on it without doing that, why would you want to?
To the Arab world, by a stroke of luck, the first viziers in Baghdad are former Buddhists who are Sanskrit literate and know all this stuff. And these guys, they're a family called the Barmakids, send a mission to Sind, and in 776, the Sind Raja, who wants peace with this enormous, very fierce empire, sends the works of Brahmagupta, who's this early Indian mathematician. It seems to be a sort of compilation of 2 of his books, which the Arabs call the Sind Hind. And this becomes the basis for Islamic maths and astronomy. It's simplified and clarified by a genius called Al-Khwarizmi. Al-Khwarizmi is from what is now northern Uzbekistan. And he writes a book which has a long, unwieldy title of the Book of Indian Mathematics According to Completion and Balancing. Now that's too much of a mouthful in any language.
Sounds like a real page turner.
and so it gets known very widely as Al-Jabr, from which we get the word algebra. And his name, Al-Khwarizmi, the man from Khwarazm, which is Khiva, northern Uzbekistan, becomes the basis, Al-Khwarizmi becomes the basis for our word algorithm.
God damn it.
So there is the ultimate Sanjeev Bhaskar
Oh my God,
bullseye.
it really is.
Algorithm, Indian.
Algorithms,
Algebra, Indian.
Oh my God. But so let's talk
But the
about
decline,
the
yeah.
decline. So why does
Okay.
it stop? Is it just that, you've got these other hugely complex, well-armed, organized societies hemming in the Indosphere? Is it just that, I don't know, that you've got the rise of the Mongols? Like, what's going on?
2 things, and you've already touched on both. So the first thing is in the 1100s, you get a bunch of Turks, and the inscriptions specifically call them Turushka, or occasionally Lord of the Horses. And these guys are new converts to Islam, pretty rough bunch of nomads, still tough, use horse archers. And they first overwhelm the Punjab, capture Lahore, and then they capture Delhi in 1192. And so you're getting an invasion of a bunch of quite rough people who've got no interest at all in speaking Sanskrit, like the earlier generations had longed to do. And Sanskrit by this stage has spread all the way from Kandahar in Afghanistan through to sort of Bali and Java and Indonesia. These guys are not interested in that. And then you get a second blow a generation later when the Mongols don't conquer India, but conquer everywhere else in Asia. And so you get
But they get really far down, like into Burma, kind of.
There's one little raid into Burma, but the Khaljis, who are the Delhi sultans, successfully fend off the Mongols, including an extraordinary moment when the Mongols come and invade Delhi, and actually the Tughlaqs let loose the sluices of this hydraulic system that they developed, and the Mongols are swept away in a sort of tidal wave. It's very impressive.
I thought ditches. I thought like horses versus ditches. Dig a good ditch.
A lot of all that. And then there's this other moment, according to one source, when...
This is crazy, going back in history, because I need to brush up on history more of the Mongols and more of the Turks, because I don't really know, like, about them enough, because I've never, like, growing up in the United States, like, we never really learned history outside of the United States. We learn kind of geography, but not real geography, just continents. We learn geography about continents around the world. But I never learned, like, all this history, and so I feel like there's so much that I would like to learn about from their conversation, like the rise of, I guess, the Turks, and they had no interest in speaking Sanskrit. And they came to invade and invaded and took over Delhi, I think he said it. And then you got the rise of the Mongols, and they didn't invade India, but they took over, they took over everywhere around India, but they tried to invade India and were turned back by this hydraulic system that produced a tidal wave that wiped them out. But so while they didn't invade India, they took over all the area around India. And so I guess this is like where she's asking the question, what happened, like when did the Indosphere start to decline, like why did it stop? And he's explaining why, and I'm like, I need to learn about a lot of this stuff.
Like horses versus ditches. Dig a good ditch.
A lot of all that. And then there's this other moment, according to one source, when Genghis himself, who would have been obviously the big mother of all disasters, he comes through the Punjab and he sees a rhinoceros and he thinks it's some sort of devil. And turns away and instead destroys Poland in the end.
God, really? That rhino.
But for that rhino.
Really did India a solid.
But the result of all this is twofold. One, you've got a hostile border now between India and the Mongol Empire, which stops traders passing over it. So what had been a very porous route for Indian monks and holy men going backwards and forwards to the northern half of the Indosphere is now cut. The second thing that happens is that a lot of the highly educated scholars and writers and teachers who had been living in what was the great caravan cities of Balkh and Merv and all these wonderful places in Central Asia, a lot of them flee to Delhi. And Persian becomes the language of government, not just initially in Delhi, but also eventually in the next 200 years, the rest of India, including Hindu India. It's the diplomatic language, it's Persian. So it isn't that the Sanskrit world disappears. It's never disappeared. It's still there now. But it's subsumed beneath a second layer, like sediment falling down to the sea. And then, of course, later on, you get the English, the East India Company, and there's a third layer. And you can look in this a variety of ways. If you're a Hindu nationalist like Narendra Modi, you can look at it and say 1,000 years of slavery. I, as an outsider, and I, in a sense, don't have a dog in this race. I'm coming from Scotland. To me, it's the richness of Indian society that you've got all this amazing Sanskrit stuff, all this amazing Taj Mahal and Mughal miniatures above that. And finally, you've got all these amazing people who can like Salman Rushdie, who can write English better than English, or Arundhati Roy. So it's a very rich layer cake. But as we know, the Indian nationalists have made a great deal of political capital saying this is slavery, which I don't think is historically accurate, though it's certainly true that the initial invasions of the Turks in the 12th century was accompanied by temple destruction and a lot of iconoclasm. When you go around somewhere like Madhya Pradesh today, and a lot of the early temples just have their face.
So I love to hear you guys take on that topic, where he actually disagrees with. He said a lot of Indian nationalists said that during this time it was slavery, and he said I actually disagree. I actually look at it as Indian richness, like that you get all these great things out of. But what would you guys say? In the comments, say, do you agree with him? Do you disagree with him? And I feel like it's cool for like people to have different opinions, because I genuinely believe two people can see the exact same thing and see it very differently. They can both have completely different perspectives and perceptions of what just happened. And so I'd love to hear from you guys in the comment section, because I don't know enough about the history. I haven't studied enough about it to pick one side of the fence. So if you have, talk to me.
When you go around somewhere like Madhya Pradesh today, and a lot of the early temples just have their faces smashed in of all the idols and so on. So there is, as you know, a big culture war in India at the moment. We've got a Hindu nationalist government running the country.
And
and
also
this is
tells
all
a particular story about, there have been these Muslim hordes which have, invaded India, suppressed the culture, and they want to do it again.
Yeah, and that is a popular narrative, partly because a generation of left-leaning intellectuals after independence were so horrified by the violence of partition that they slightly downplayed in the history books the destruction that did take place. Just like when the Normans took Anglo-Saxon England, a great deal of destruction took place. There was a lot of, pillage, burning, looting and raping. And a new world, the Norman world, was built over the Anglo-Saxon one in the same way in 12th century.
I suppose the difference is, though, is that with telling the story of the harrying of the North or something like that, no one really holds it against the French, because it's not a live political issue.
Correct.
Whereas when you're telling the story of temple destruction by Muslims within the context of post-partition, or you're trying to tell that story now when you've got, love jihad, conspiracy theories and all that kind
Correct.
of thing, how do you write history books which tell difficult truths in political context like that?
So this was the big challenge writing this book. And also,
That's a good question.
there's another challenge, which is that you've got this sort of weird thing whereby Mughal history is now identified with sort of lefty Marxist historians like Irfan Habib, while ancient history, the period of ancient glory, which the BJP and the RSS look back to as the pure, unadulterated wonder of the past, is the dream period of the Hindu right. And the challenge writing this book is, in a sense, to strip away both mythologies, to admit that a lot of temple destruction did take place in the 12th century, but also to sort of hold up that amazing things happened in Hindu India, and we shouldn't be ashamed to say it just because the far right are obsessed with it. So I've tried to tell a version in this book which provides no historian is neutral, but I am an outsider still, despite living there for 40 years, to try and give as neutral a picture as I possibly can of an extraordinary period of history, which, for various reasons, is not well known, and where it is known in India is often mythologized. So you get a lot of old uncles talking about nuclear weapons in the Mahabharata, and sort of, and the flying, the gods moved around in helicopters, and the rishis had the internet. So it's very easy to take and plastic surgery in the Vedas and this.
But I mean, it comes from. I was thinking this about the Sanjeev Bhaskar sketch.
I feel like so he's just saying, like, as an I'm giving an outsider perspective. Like, yes, there was a lot of temple destruction back in those times. So yes, one perspective is right. Like, there was a lot of destruction there. I'm sure there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of killing. There was a lot of suffering. He said, but also great things came out of that time as well. So he's not looking at it as just a period of terribleness or a period of greatness, but from his perspective, he kind of sees the good and the bad that come from that period. And so that's a very interesting perspective. And he's saying, I don't have a dog in this fight. Like, I'm trying to tell it as neutral as possible and non-biased as possible. But at the end of the day, it's still like through his research, his perspective on exactly what happened. So again, someone might have a completely different perspective, which that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that they see things differently.
Plastic surgery in the Vedas and this.
But I mean, it comes from. I was thinking this about the Sanjeev Bhaskar sketch, which is the Indian uncle pointing at everything and saying Indian. There's a tragedy in there, which is this is a man who's
Correct.
been told you've got no culture, or if you do, it's inferior, and you've got no history.
Correct.
And so this is somebody saying, no, I do have history.
And also there is this sense that, the Indian uncle is correct in saying that, this is an extraordinary culture. The Indians did invent a lot. It's true.
Yeah.
But it's become so discredited by wild claims about atomic weapons and the Mahabharata and the rest of it that no one takes it seriously. So I'm trying to do something which will probably lead to the book being hated on both sides, but in a sense, wind back into a factual, realistic narrative what ancient India did achieve, but also to tell the left in India, this is just because the right love this period, it doesn't mean it's not an absolutely extraordinary period that you should be very proud of. That extraordinary things happened, and it's actually true that the story of this has been suppressed, partly by academic fashion, partly by the story of the Silk Road, partly by colonialism. There's a whole variety of reasons we don't know this, but we don't, and it's important you do know it. So I've tried to find a way of writing this battlefield, this culture war history, in a way that's accessible, full of characters. It's got a quarter of this book is footnotes, because this is such a contested period. There's nothing which I can't back up with serious sources. And so far, I have to say, I mean, I was very nervous about this book because it's a period which I had no idea anyone was interested in or not, because frankly, no one's written a book about it since A.L. Basham's The Wonder That Was India in the 1940s, 50s. And partly also because it is such a minefield. But I have to say, this weekend, #1 in India.
Nice.
And #4 in Britain. So far, so good.
I mean, I've got one last question for you. I mean, we were joking about rhubarb and that my brain just was completely scrambled by finding out that it was from India. There's a really famous Stuart Hall paragraph from, I think it's Old and New Identities, Old and New Ethnicities, where he says, I'm the sugar at the bottom
That's
of the
a very
English cup of
Bengali
tea.
intellectual reference, if I may say.
It's the most Bengali thing about it. And it says, well, some others are the tea itself. Through writing this book, or from your 40 years of living in India, has it made you reflect on Britishness and what Britain is and what it means to be British in a different way?
Oh.
Living in India definitely has. And that's why, in a sense, I spent the last 20 years writing about the colonial period. There's 4 books, which now in a box set called the Company Quartet, which does the story of the East India Company, which is this an extraordinary story too. It's how one British business from one office in London takes over the richest country in the world.
On a skeleton staff as well. Not many people.
On a skeleton staff,
That's
using
crazy.
largely Indian mercenaries.
And did it make
And
you...
paid for.
What? So, of course, we've heard about British colonization, how they looted India, the richest country in the world at that time, and took so much from it. What I don't know is how they did it. And so that's very interesting to kind of hear that. So the East India Company on a skeleton staff using Indian mercenaries took over the richest country, and that's a very interesting concept.
Indian mercenaries.
And did it make
And
you...
paid for by money borrowed from Jain merchants in Calcutta.
I didn't know that.
Mawaris, and the Jains lend the monies. And so it's the one thing that East India Company is clever about is it always repays its debts on time, which is not true of a lot of Indian rulers. So even if you have a heroic Maratha warlord, he might just hang up the moneylender by the ankles if he asks for his money back with interest. But the Brits looted, pillaged, raped, looted, did all the stuff, but they repaid their debts on time.
I mean,
so the
what did it make
Mawaris
you
loved
think
them.
about British identity and the composition of Britishness? Because I suppose when I think about Britishness, you know, I go back to the canon, I think about Chaucer, and I think about Shakespeare, and then I find all of these international thumbprints all over these quintessentially English texts.
Well, what's fascinating is, in a sense, looking at how composite language English is, because right back in your early Chaucer, you'll find the word pepper, which is originally a Tamil word, or ginger, which is also a Tamil word. Tamil and Sanskrit are there very early on in the English language. And then in the 18th century, it's just overwhelmed by bungalows and cummerbunds and pajamas and all the rest of it.
Hooligans? Thugs?
Thugs, definitely. So there is a deep, ancient link between these cultures. And one of the plus points of the English language is that it is a language which has been allowed to absorb all this word, unlike French, which is often quite a fiercely policed language.
Oh, Spanish as well. It had a very strong sense of its own identity and resisted hybridization. But William Dalrymple, thank you so much for joining us on Downstream this week.
Thank you, Ash. Very nice to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you for getting me out on time for my lunch. Thank you.
We're up against FC. People-powered media. I love that. That was an absolutely incredible interview with these two. I feel like I learned a lot, but I also feel like I walk away wanting to learn more about so much. And that's what I love about doing reactions, is the fact that I do get to dive back into history, not through my own research, but through the research of so many others, and then kind of get to listen to like so many different sides of a story and get to kind of put pieces together in my head and come up to my own conclusion. It's just really fascinating. It's really fascinating. Let me know what you guys thought about this interview. If you happen to enjoy this video, please don't forget to subscribe, get a video a thumbs up, and check out the next one. See you guys next time.